Well, what is going on, YouTube? Welcome back to A Therapeutic Edge. Today on the table in front of us, we have a new addition to the collection, and one that I am very, very excited to have and to share with you. This is the Koenig Arius. Now, this is an older model. This is a Gen 2. This one is CTS XHP steel. It is running on ceramic bearings. It is all titanium. It is a frame lock, as you can see. This is a remarkable knife. Now, the Koenig story is pretty straightforward. It's an all-American made company. Bill Koenig decided to start making knives 2013, 2014. He had originally wanted to go into business with his father, but his father passed away, and he decided to continue to chase his dream. And so he worked his ass off and created a knife company for himself to build the knives that he wanted to build. The Arius is the end result of that. Now, there are 4 or 5 generations of this. This, as I said, is a Gen 2. This is an older one. The newer ones have super steels, and they are hollow ground. They have refined the action a little bit on the newer ones. But this one is mine, and I love it just the way it is. Would I love to have one of the new ones as well? Well, sure, but I'm not going to knock this one just because it is an older generation. So let's talk about what you get. Well, first let's talk about the price. So these range in price from about $500 up to about $750, depending on what you get with your knife. This is a very basic model. When this came out, it was about $500, which is not that crazy for what is essentially a custom knife. Now, he does have a relatively large factory plant. He has a large workshop, where he makes his knives, so he tends to make them in runs, which is why this is considered a mid-tech and not a full custom. This, for instance, is a full custom, right? Made by hand, one knife at a time. The Ariuses are made in batches, but they are still as close to custom as you can get without actually getting an individual custom. And he does make custom versions if you wanted such a thing. I have been chasing one of these for about a year. A friend of mine has a newer one, and we were at dinner one time, and I got a chance to hold it and play with it and absolutely fell in love with it. It's a lot of things. It is a remarkable pocket knife. Let's just leave it at that. Now, this one, and I hope it shows up on camera, has some fantastic milling on the tie scales, both lock side and show side. Very fine lines that give it just a little bit of grip without being super aggressive. It is very, very nice. One of the things about the Arius that sold me on it and made me want one so badly is that, at least for my hands, it is singularly one of the most comfortable pocket knives I've ever held. Now, you guys know that I generally like a more rectangular, simpler shaped handle. But this thing, with this large choiled out area right here for your fingers and this nice chunk back here to grip onto, it settles into my palm as well as any knife I own. So it is just really great to carry and use. Now, as I mentioned, this one is CTS XHP steel. That means that it is, well, depends on who you ask. It is either a much more durable, it leans into the 440C range for a lot of things, sort of super 440C, or a very corrosion-resistant D2. They tend to share similar characteristics with edge retention as really good D2. This is called a micro-melt steel, which is sort of their version of they basically make it into a fine powder before they melt it down and then make it into bars before they shape it into blades. So the internal structure, the grain of CTS XHP is really consistent throughout the blade, if it's heat treated right. And I got to tell you, Koenig heat treats correctly. Let's take a look at what you get for your money. Well, first, what you get is a lot of love and attention from the maker. He knew what he wanted, and he made just that knife. Now, the newer ones have some improvements, as I've mentioned, but not enough that it's a different knife, right? So this is just a superb example of a sort of basic Koenig Arius. Now, they make some really fancy ones with fancy carbon fiber and inlet, all sorts of stuff. But you know me, I like more of a plain knife. So this works out perfectly for me. Let's take a look at what you get. You get 1, 2, 3, just at 3.5 inches of cutting on just over 3.5 inches of CTS it's XHP steel. God, I don't know why I can't say that today. It is hilarious. The grip area from just behind the flipper tab, you get 1, 2, 3, 4.5 inches of grip. As you can see, there is plenty of handle there, even for my big old meat hooks. The overall knife is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and just over 8.5 inches in length. It is a really, really nice carry. Now look, one of the problems with knives like this is the price. I get that, right? You can get a very similar knife in many ways for a lot less money. But there is something about these small batch sort of custom-esque knives that set them apart. Once you get there in your collecting, once you land there in your desire, it becomes obvious where those differences are. And this knife is a really good example of that. You know, I only have a couple of other customs. I've got my custom Mako, my Gavco Mako, and I've got my custom Hoback. Right? No, move this up a little bit. These two are handmade customs, individual knives made by one person at one time from start to finish. And they are very, very similar in feel to the mid-tech Arius here. All right, so we've talked about how long it is. We've talked about how long the blade is. The only pop of color on this knife is this beautifully blue anode out backspacer. Now, you guys know I don't like a ton of color on my knives, but a single pop of color really does nice things. The hardware on this is interesting. It's black screws with a silver pivot. I've seen them with all black, and I've seen them with all silver. This one just happens to have a silver pivot. I dig that quite a bit. As you can see, the pivot is actually notched directly into the scale, right? So it's totally not free spinning, and that's where that happens. It's also a really beautiful pivot. It's milled out so that it's got a nice little bit of shape to it. There are no sharp edges. In fact, this knife is knocked down in such a way that the only place you are going to find a sharp edge on this knife is right where you want it, and it is really beautifully sharp. I can tell by the size of the edge bevel here that this is the original factory edge, although I did get this one used. It is a very, very small bevel, secondary bevel, but it is very sharp. So, as I mentioned, some of the new ones are hollow ground. This one is flat ground, and I actually, on a blade like this, I'm okay with that. Now, you guys know I do like a good hollow ground blade. I'm a fan. But in this knife's case, because it is such a high grind, it comes way down here to a very thin edge, which is very nice. And look at the bevel across the top of that blade. This is actually concave, right? It's not a flat bevel. It actually is shaped like, you know, it's just remarkable. I don't know if it's going to show up on camera very well, but it's just an attention to detail that is superior. The blade has next to no markings. It is stamped Koenig right here. I'm not sure that's going to show up on camera. And beyond that, nothing. Super clean in its design. I love it a ton. Do I recommend that you get one? Well, yeah. I mean, if you're into and want a really expensive knife that is going to serve you exceptionally well in all areas, Koenig Knives makes that kind of knife. If you are not interested in really expensive knives, then no, this is not the knife for you. As I said, I didn't want one until I held one, and then I realized that I really, really wanted one, so I started hunting and finally landed this one. And I am really happy about it. It lives in a special place with my Hoback and with my Gavco. It's not an everyday carry for me, although it could be completely functionally that way. I am not so made of money that I can afford to just carry around, $500, $600, $700 knives without worrying about it. I'm like you guys. I have less expensive knives that I carry on the daily. But when I do want to carry something really nice, really beautiful, and yet still completely reliable, that's when I break out the Arius for sure. Now, could you carry this every day for the rest of your life? Yeah, absolutely. You really could. It's that kind of a knife. It is up there with sort of the Chris Reeve mentality of knives, spend a bunch of money up front and have that one knife for the rest of your life, and it would survive. It would hold up. I think it really would. I'm lucky I don't have to do that. I have a huge collection that I get to choose from. But when I want, as I said, something really sort of elegant and yet tough, that's when the Arius breaks out. The landing ramp for your thumb, look at this. It's milled out in such a way that, right, so for your finger, excuse me, when you drop that flipper, and look at that flipper. It's beautiful. It's a little bit pokey, but because of the shape of the knife, it does not stab stuff in your pocket. Now you can deploy this with a finger flick. I think you could even, you can even thumb flick it because of that hole. And of course the flipper works every time. He does make some that have what's called the flipper delete, where this is missing because the thumb hole, the deployment from this edge works so well that it's sort of up to you. I love the fact that you have choices. Let's do some size comparisons. Here it is against the mighty Bug Out, and as you can see, it is considerably larger than the Bug Out. Now let's compare it against the Ritter Hogue, which I think is actually a really good comparison, and let's talk about why. Let's get this out of the way. The Ritter Hogue is $153, and for that you get CPM 20 CV, you get really comfortable scales. In G10, you get a lot of really nice features, and you get a very, very similar blade profile. Not the top, but the actual cutting area on the blade is very similar. So if you're looking for a knife that works similarly to the Koenig, but you don't want to spend a ton of money, the Hogue is a great way to go. Collecting knives is a funny thing, right? It is not about use, although that matters. It is not about a lot of things. For me, it has become about seeing something that I think is beautiful, really well done, a lovely design, a great maker, something like that, and figuring out a way to bring one into the collection. Now, I've done that with some knives, and then they move on, because the thing about knives is you don't really know how you feel about one until you get it in your hands. This knife, from the moment I picked one up until the moment I got my own, has remained an absolute marvel of design and aesthetic, and then so this is not going to go anywhere. It has a lanyard hole built into the backspacer, as you can see if you lanyard, and it's a nice, big, generous lanyard hole. As I said, it's part of the backspacer. The scales are milled out to allow it, but it also doesn't interfere in any way with the use of the knife, and that's really nice. Sometimes when you get large, spaces for lanyards on the backspacer like this, they stick up or they're in the way. No, this is just a part of the natural flow of the knife, and it works out really well. Now, lockup is at about 25%, but it is absolutely rock solid, right? No wiggle, no nothing. The action on this one is a little slower than on the modern generations, but it is still very smooth and very nice. I love this knife. I really do. And I think that if you were to pick one up, you'd love it too. But again, it's a real commitment, and so you got to know for sure that it's what you want to get into. As I said, I chased one for a year before I found one, both at a combination of places where I could sell some knives fast enough and it was available to get what I wanted. And then I did. Stories like Bill Koenig's with the basic success of a small shop that is rapidly growing into a very popular and successful knife company. And I say still growing because even though he's been at it for a number of years now, and there have been, I think 4 or 5 generations of this knife, he's still a small business, right? So he's still producing, I think 200 or 300 of these at a time, maybe even maybe not that many. And so they tend to come and go very quickly. If you decide that you want one, it is really important to pay attention to both Koenig's social media profile and hitting his website to pay attention to when drops come, because when they come, they show, and when they're gone, they're gone. So it's worth keeping your eyes out if you want such a thing. They do pop up on the secondary market, but they do tend to go very quickly there as well. So you need to know for sure that this is something you want to get into. For me, it is an absolute joy to have added one of these to the collection. I do. I think it is probably one of the most beautiful pocket knives I've ever seen. And that's where we're going to end it. This is the Koenig Arius. This is my Koenig Arius. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about the Arius or any of my knives, feel free to ask down in the comments below. We'll see you next time.